Uh, Hi everyone, am I audible and is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so let's start today's session. So I am Geetika Agarwal. I am a PhD scholar at CSISC, and today is the 11th tutorial of Wildlife Ecology, which is the NPTEL course taken by Dr. Ankur Awadhiya. Okay, so in this week, what was discussed was applied ecology, and the broad topics that were talked about were optimum yield problem, biological control, ecotoxicology, restoration ecology. If anyone has any doubts, you can interrupt me and ask anytime. And if you have any doubts of this in this week or in the previous weeks, you can ask me. Okay. So, moving on to talking about what was done this week, let's see what is absolute versus what is relative abundance. This should be a fairly easy question for you guys by now. So, can you guys tell me what is absolute and what is relative abundance? You can like unmute and tell it or type it out in the chat box. Anything is fine.
More number of elements in the given compared to the other elements in the given environment.
By elements, you mean organisms.
Yeah.
So, that would be an absolute abundance or a relative abundance.
Um, Absolute.
Like,
Relative.
yeah, because if you are comparing two
Compare.
places, that would be a relative
Mm-hmm.
abundance. So, what would be an absolute abundance? From this answer only, you should be able to guess what should be the absolute abundance at a particular place. Okay. So the absolute abundance basically would tell you the exact number of organisms in that particular area or in that particular habitat. And that exact number you might reach by counting the number of organisms in that area, by carrying out surveys, by carrying out camera traps and all these things. And for relative abundance, you would be talking about what is the relative number of animals in this area compared to some other area, or what is the relative number of organisms at this time point compared to some time point in the past in the same region. So relative abundance could be done by various sampling methods which don't really tell you the exact number of organisms. Like if you are going out and you say you have this trail in the forest, and you go out and you count the number of birds you see, them maybe the number of common miners you see on a road when you're traveling. So you may be seeing 10 to 20 miners, and that may not be the exact number of miners that are there in that particular area, but that is okay, that is something that you saw at that day. And then you went some other day on the same trail, and now you saw maybe 15 miners. Then you went another time, you saw 17. So you would say that okay, on an average in this area there are around say 17 to 18 miners. But if you go there multiple times, and eventually from 20 you just see 15 and then 10 and then 5, then you would say that okay, maybe the relative abundance of miners in this area is reducing, and there might be many reasons behind that. So okay, moving on to what is the removal method. This is also one ways of relatively measuring what would be the abundance of organisms in a particular area. So what is the removal method? Anything? What does the term suggest? What do you think it means?
Removing the organisms from one place.
And like, yeah, so you basically, okay, fine. So you basically go to an area and you are removing the organisms from that place. This could either be done by trapping the organisms, could be done by hunting the organisms, or like fishing if it's the case of a pond or a or a lake or something like that. So removal technically involves taking away a certain number of organisms from that ecosystem. And you're taking them away and you're not replacing them. When you are if you're counting or doing something else, in that you're not taking away the organisms, but here you remove those organisms. Even if you're misnetting, you trap those, you count those, or you band those certain birds and organisms, and you release them back into the environment. But in this method, if you remove that particular number of organisms, you don't replace them back into that environment. So yeah, so it basically either it is fishing for aquatic ecosystems, it's hunting and trapping for terrestrial systems. And when you count the number of organisms that have been captured, that can give you an estimate of what is the relative abundance of that particular species. So you go to that pond again and again and say you're putting in the same amount of effort. You have five fishing rods, you have the same number of bait or the same type of bait, and you spend, say, 10 hours fishing. And if, say, in the first attempt you caught like 60 fish, in the next time you went a week later, you caught maybe 40 fish. In the week later you caught only 30, 20 fishes. So you would say that okay, the relative abundance of fishes in this particular pond is going down. That may be because of people capturing more and more fish by the day, or it could be because of certain other reasons, like maybe the temperature is changing, it's not an okay environment for the fish, or the predators are increasing, things like that. So but that so this is the removal method, and it gives you a relative idea of what is going on with the numbers of organisms in that particular area. So moving on, let's talk about the threat that the wildlife is facing at the hands of the humans. So if we discuss about the fishes, so this is a map of the Great Lakes in the USA. So there are these five lakes that are more or less connected to each other, and they comprise of the Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario. And here, people have been carrying out fishing for a long time. But now, because of the increased demands of for seafood, and because of improved fishing practices, because of industrialization of the fishing uh, practices, the aquatic life is declining in these particular area, in this particular lakes. And there are declines in the populations of the whitefish, the sturgeon fish, and the walleye. So this here is the whitefish which is found in the Great Lakes. This is the walleye, and this is the sturgeon fish. So some of the fishes, they are either captured for food, and some others are captured just for a decorative piece for putting up in people's places, and some are captured because people want to have them as pets, so for pet trading. So overharvesting of fish is one reason why aquatic life is facing a threat. Moving on to birds. So none of the organisms are like saved from this overharvesting. Birds, amphibians, mammals, plants, everything is facing a threat because of overharvesting. And birds are captured for either pet trade, for their feathers, for sports in which they are released and some games are played, for food. So there are a lot of parrots, pigeons, pheasants. You might know jungle fowl and all these. They are used to. They are fought against each other, and that is a sport that is played with them, and things like that. So this is the Carolina parakeet. It was the only parakeet that was found in the United States, and it went extinct around a decade ago, and that was because it was hunted for its feathers, and these feathers were used as decoration for hats, for the hats that people wore. So for decorating those hats, a lot of these parakeets were captured and they were killed for their feathers. So amphibians, as you might be aware of, amphibians like frogs, toads, these are hunted. They're hunted for food, they're hunted for medicinal purposes. In a lot of countries, like in the Southeast Asian countries, they're used for medicinal purposes. The frog legs are eaten as a delicacy. They're used in education, as you might be aware of. Frogs are the things that you dissect when you go on to when you join a medical school. That's the first organism that you get for dissecting. And they're also used for pet trade. So this is the California red-legged frog. It is now under under strict laws. It is vulnerable. It is threatened. It is an endangered species, and now you cannot really capture or hunt this species. But its numbers had declined a lot, and this was captured for food, because its legs are a delicacy. Mammals, as you might be aware of, are also under a lot of threat because of things like food, for medicine, for their fur, for horns, for antlers, for like the teeth of the elephants. So a lot of large mammals, they face a lot of decline. Moving on, so plants are also not like saved from us. So plants are harvested for medicine, for wood, building material, for decoration. Certain orchids, they are also very prized, and they are severely threatened, and now they are under federal protection. This plant called the American ginseng. So a lot of people started harvesting it in increased numbers because it is renowned for its medicinal properties. And now again, this plant is almost not found. It's almost extinct in the wild. It's not found in the wild anymore. There are certain places where people are like cultivating it, but it's not found in the wild on its own. Reptiles like snakes, they are and like certain lizards, they are all prized collections for their skins, for their eggshells, for pet trade, again for meat. So a lot of crocodiles, pythons, monitor lizards, they are used for their leathers. And so this is the Kemp's Ridley sea turtle. It is also it was also under a lot of threat because this was captured, and this was there was this overseas turtle trade in which a lot of these turtles were captured, and they were sold at very high prices to people who like to collect either their shells, or they like to have these turtles as their own pets, things like that. And a lot of invertebrates are facing declines because they're either used as a bait for fishing. So horseshoe crabs, so the horseshoe crabs on the right, these are used as a bait for fishing when you're trying to capture eels. And shells and corals are also are captured for decoration purposes. And here you can see these Chesapeake Bay oysters. Their numbers are also facing a huge decline because of over harvesting, because people either like to consume these oysters. They're used as food. So, moving on to population sizes. So, while harvesting these organisms, it's true that people are not going to stop harvesting these organisms. There are demands, there is a market, and as long as there is a market, there are going to be people who will capture the organisms and who will sell them. So, how to manage this? How to manage the harvesting of organisms and to not exhaust the environment's supply, or to not exhaust the number of the organisms that you're harvesting. So, for that, one thing that is important to keep in mind is what is the population size? What is the population size that you're dealing with, and what are the numbers of the organism, and how does the curve look? Is the population on a rise? Is the population on a decline? And consequently, you should control how you are, harvesting these organisms. So, what is the equation that one uses to estimate a population size? Can you guys tell me what is the equation for population size? So if you have a population of Pn in the nth generation, what will be the population in the Pn plus 1 in the next generation? Anyone? Sai, Janvi, would you like to guess what would be the population equation? Like what are the various things do you think it depends on the size of the population?
About the natality and mortality.
Yes,
immigration.
yes. So you're correct. So okay, so what adds to the population? Is it natality or is it mortality?
It's natality and immigration
That's
adds, and the mortality and immigration gets subtracted.
yes, very nice. So basically, the population in the next generation is equals to the population in the current generation plus the number of births and the number of organisms that are immigrating to the area minus the number of deaths and the number of organisms that are emigrating out of this area. Okay, so apart from the population size, another thing that you should, okay, and one thing I would like to tell you. Uh, so in the Americas, so they have this thing where turkeys and ducks, they are hunted in large numbers because they are consumed during this Thanksgiving season. You might be aware of this, that turkeys are a huge delicacy in the states for the Thanksgiving season. So how they control that the what is the number of people like ducks or turkeys can be hunted is that they carry out these national surveys, like these yearly surveys of the number of ducks that are there in the in the USA, and the government then sets out a quota of how many ducks can be hunted this year, depending on what is the population size and like how many ducklings are there, or how many, like what is the growth curve gonna be. So they carry out all this assessment and they set out a given quota that in these particular states only these many ducks can be hunted, and then officials are then given the duty of staying in these areas where hunting is carried out. Hunting is not allowed everywhere. There are these certain areas in which legal hunting is carried out, and people then there go out and they carry out their hunting. And then when the quota is exhausted, when that number is reached, they stop any further hunting for these ducks. So that is one way I think it's very nice in which they are able to control their duck and turkey populations. But it's a little it requires a lot of effort, because first you carry out the survey, you count the number of ducks out there, and then you calculate what how many you can hunt to keep a sustainable population. But I think that's a nice way in which you can control and not exhaust the supply of these organisms. Another thing you should keep in mind while harvesting organisms is the environmental fluctuations. What are the changes that these organisms or these ecosystems might be undergoing? So, apart from the population growth models, it's important to keep a check on what are the environmental changes. There could be a disease spread in that particular area. There could be a catastrophe that recently happened, a forest fire happened, maybe, or a flood happened, or there could be climate changes that maybe now the temperature is not as optimum as it used to be, and therefore the fecundity of the organisms has gone down. So then you cannot harvest the same number of organisms that you used to in the past, because they will not be able to uh, like they will not be able to continue to produce as many young as they did in the past, and that might lead to a sharp decline in their populations. Okay, so moving on, so, what do you think are some principles that you need to keep in mind if you want to carry out an effective management of these wildlife stocks or of these organisms? Like, how many organisms are out there? If you want to maintain a constant number, what are the principles of effective management? Would you guys like to take a guess? No? Okay, so some ways in which you could manage the wildlife is that you keep in mind what is the demand right now for certain organisms, and what is the motivation behind people who go out for hunting. And of course, people who are like carrying out fishing for a livelihood, they will not be thinking about bigger things like, okay, I should save the number of fishes, otherwise we will exhaust the supply. Because they can anyway, they switch on to some other fish species if this one is exhausted. And what their current requirements are is to feed their family, is to earn some money. So they don't keep all these things in mind. So when we are coming up with certain strategies for managing or for management of these things, we should keep in mind what is the demand, what is the motivation, and how are people going to take your say your ideas that you put forth. So consequently, you should design ideas in a way that benefit both the government as well as the local communities which are there, and you should make it look like it's not just the government that cares about that particular resource, but the local community, their livelihood entirely depends on that resource, and if they take care of it, they'll be able to like survive better and earn for a longer time. Then actions should be taken. If you are noticing that there is a decline in the populations, you should take action even before the scientists come up and tell you that, okay, fine, you have to do this and this, because if you don't, then this organism is going to be extinct in the next 5 years. Because if you keep waiting for scientific research and for results, then that might lead to a delay which you may not want, because a lot of the times scientific research takes time, and publishing that research takes even more time. So if you know that something requires an urgent action, we should go ahead, and policymakers should go ahead and do that instead of waiting for the scientists to come and tell them. Then the third point is that yes, of course, all these different people should come together, like the policymakers, the implementers, the government, the scientists. They should come together, and then they should remedy all the problems that are existing in the country or in the state. It should not just be the scientists which are like just saying that, okay, we are monitoring these levels and the numbers are going down, we need to save it, and then the government does not do anything, or waits for decades before the action is taken. It is important that the government realizes that it's not just us who are concerned about these different organisms, but it's the country's concern to save its biodiversity. And we need to be prepared for the uncertainties that we might face. We might come up with a very nice plan that we think that, okay, nice, this plan is going to work out, but then suddenly, while you're acting on that plan, while you're carrying out say a restoration activity or something like that, you might face a lot of uncertain situations. Like there might be certain disease that spreads in the population that you were trying to restore, and it might decline. So you should have some backup plans in place when you're carrying out these uh, management procedures. So moving on to the second lecture, which was about pests. So can you guys tell me, how would you like to define a pest, or what is a pest in your like, what do you think is a pest?
An insect or animal that destroys food on crops.
Yeah, very nice. So, any organism that is detrimental to humans or to human concerns, like our economic concerns, like our agricultural crops, our orchards, and things like that, our livestock, our forests, they are all referred to as pests. And these organisms might not just be causing economic harms, but they might also be just an inconvenience to humans. Like having rats all around our house is not something that everybody wants. So we also classify them as pests. So some examples of pests would be mice, rats, ticks and mites, insects that you find in the agricultural fields, and some cats, dogs, all these things. So moving on to, what are the various methods that you would think one can employ in order to control the pests? What do you think are some methods that one should employ to control pests in, say, in agricultural fields?
To set bait,
To set
traps,
bait. Okay, traps, very nice.
Rather than chemical use, we should follow the natural methods to, control the pest.
Yeah, instead of doing chemicals like pesticides. But okay, yes. So the various methods that you can employ would be okay, setting using chemicals like pesticides, but we should not do that. Using natural methods, using say biological control. You can also do something called cultural control, in which you follow certain specific cultural methods of carrying out or practicing agriculture, in which you could uh, prevent having pests in your crops. Then you can use chemicals like pesticides, you could carry out biological control, or another thing that you could do is use a combination of these and use integrated pest management. Right. So moving on to what is natural control. How do you naturally control the spreading of a pests? What should I do if I want to just carry out a natural control of a pest? Any guesses? Any ideas? Okay, so for naturally controlling a pest, what you do is you just let nature do its work. You don't really interfere, or you don't really do anything, because any pest that naturally occurs in a certain area, it will have a predator in that environment. Because until and unless it's an apex predator, everything in the ecosystem is going to have a predator or a parasite for that matter. And if you just let the parasite or the predator take care of the pest, sorry for the typo, if you just let the predator or the parasite take care of the pest and you do not do anything from your side, then that is called a natural control. And as you might have guessed, some cons that are associated with the natural control is that it's going to be a slow process, because mostly when humans want to get rid of pests, they want to get rid of them as soon as possible because they want to have a very high yield of their crops. But if you let it happen naturally, it's bound to be a slow process. And it might not be useful if the pest that you have is an alien species, or if it's an invasive species, it's not native to your area. Because if it's not a native species, it might not have a predator, because right now it is not like none of the native predators have gotten used to feeding on this species. So right now this species might not have any predators, and you cannot let natural control happen in this case. So moving on to cultural control. How do you think, or what do you think is cultural control? What do you mean by cultural control? Anything, guys, you can take any guess, or like, what do you think happens when you want to control pests?
No idea, ma'am.
No idea. Okay, so cultural control is basically the type of control in which you carry out certain practices that were culturally done even in the past in order to prevent pests. So in this, farmers, they instead of applying pesticides, they use other methods. So for example, say you have a field of wheat, or you have a field of rice, and you have certain pests. And now we might know that okay, these pests, they are always only found on crops like wheat and rice and these things. So what you do is you let them be, and when you reap this you reap the wheat, you harvest your wheat, then next time, before planting new crops, what you do is you burn out the rest of the wheat that's mostly carried out in most areas. So you burn out the rest of the standing crop of wheat in your field, and then any insects or the pests that were there, they either got cut with the wheat that you harvested, or they got burnt in the fire that you caused in your field, right? So now you don't have much of these pests left in your area. Another thing that you do after this is that instead of using wheat this time, you plant, say, something else in your fields. Say you plant some leguminous crops, say you plant pulses, or you plant certain vegetables. And this pest, which was just specific for wheat and rice and such um, crops, it will not be able to live on these vegetables and on these pulses. Then you will be successfully, you would have successfully gotten rid of this pest from your field. So this is one way of culturally controlling pests from your fields. You carry out these certain practices. You either do crop rotation, you either burn the rest of the crop residues that are in the area. So these are some ways. Another things that you can do is you can like clean out your field properly. You can plow the field. You can make sure that the seeds that you're using are very clean and they do not have any pests from the beginning. So these are some ways in which you can minimize the pest invasion in your field. Moving on to chemical control. So this you all might know. So what do you think is chemical control? And what are certain pros and cons related to using this while preventing pest spread in your fields?
So using fertilizers, fertilizers actually they may get rid of the pest, help us to get rid of the pest, but they also indirectly harm the human beings also.
Hmm.
So these are some pros and cons.
So
Pesticides.
yeah, so not fertilizers exactly. Fertilizers are some chemicals that you use for better growth of your crop.
Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. So not fertilizers, pesticides and insecticides, and yes, they might help you get rid of the pests, but it might cause many other problems. So this in this chemical control, it involves the application of pesticides, insecticides to your crops in order to get rid of the concerned pests. And one of the pros is that it will get rid of these pests in very even if you spray it in very low quantities, and you will get rid of the pest in a very fast or quick manner. But the problems are that creating the pesticides that are targeted solely to this concerned pest is costly. And if you don't use the pesticides that are like that target the concerned pest species, then you might be killing off many other insects, or say many other arthropods that are of the same size, because you're just spraying something that is toxic. And even though it is in low quantities, it will kill off many other organisms that are of the same size as the pest. Additionally, this might get incorporated in the food chain, and as you might be aware, it might undergo bioaccumulation and biomagnification, which will lead to harm of the other organisms that are the part of the food chain at the higher trophic levels. So, what do you think is the definition of bioaccumulation? What is bioaccumulation and what is biomagnification, and how are these two different from each other? Do you guys have an idea?
Bioaccumulation is like chemicals that is getting piled up or stored inside tissues when it passes from one organism to another organism.
Hmm. And what is biomagnification?
Um, I don't know.
So what you just described was actually biomagnification.
Okay.
Bioaccumulation is that, okay, say I'm an organism, say I'm an insect, and I'm feeding on some leaves that had pesticides, but I did not get killed by that pesticide because maybe the quantity was low and it just got stored in my tissues. So that is bioaccumulation, when it just got stored in you and you did not die because of that particular toxin. And biomagnification is when a lot of these insects which have this pesticide in their bodies, they were consumed by a higher trophic level, say a bird. And now that bird that has eaten 10 such insects, so it has 10x amount of pesticide in its body. That is biomagnification. Because in the lower trophic level, say every certain index, every organism had 10 grams or 10 milligrams, say, of the toxin. And now, when it went to the next trophic level, every organism, if it's consuming 10 of the previous trophic levels, now it has 100 milligrams of the toxin in itself. So, the amount or the level of toxins is getting magnified when you're moving up the food chain. So, that is called biomagnification. Okay, so moving on. So, what are the various impacts that pesticides have on the environment? So, how do you categorize the various impacts that pesticides have on the environment or on the organisms for that matter? Anyone would like to take a guess?
It might create um, toxicity in other non-targeted organisms.
Hmm.
It might destroy the soil health as well,
Yes. So you're correct. These are some ways in which the
and it
pesticide.
can also cause bioaccumulation and biomagnification.
Yeah, that is what you said in the first point, that it might get accumulated in other non-targeted organisms. Consequently, it might affect the soil in a way that it either makes it nutrient rich or nutrient poor, and that might affect the other plants that you were not targeting. Some ways in which you categorize these various impacts are lethal, sublethal, genetic. So lethal impacts is that, okay, if anything consumes that particular pesticides, it's dead. So even not just your targeted species, but anything that by mistake consumes this pesticide, it's gonna die. So that's a lethal impact. Sublethal impact is that it is not lethal in certain quantities. So you might just feel things like you're lethargic, or you're not, or the organism is not as active as it usually is. So these are some sublethal impacts. It might not be able to say dodge its predator because it's not as fast as it used to be, or it is not eating that well. The health Its health gets compromised. Moving on to teratogenic or developmental impacts. Genetic impacts are such that it might like alter the genetic structure of the organism, and then when it gives rise to the next offsprings, they might not be they might not be similar to the previous one because they have certain genetic changes in them now, and it might have some mutations which might impact it. Either again, they might cause a death, they might make it sterile, there might be many other things that impact the progeny. And do you guys know what is teratogeny, or what are teratogenic impacts? Anyone? No. So teratogeny basically means is uh, when the zygote is still either in the egg, or if it's in the case of mammals, it's still in the womb, but it is not developing in a normal manner. So that is basically teratogenic. Terato originates from the word monster. So it means that the organism is not does not come out as it should, and it has certain specific changes caused in its development. So genetic impact happens in your gene structure. Teratogenic impacts happen when the organism is still either in the egg in the case of insects, lizards, and all these organisms, or it's still in the womb in the case of mammals. So, for example, in a normal mammal, there should be, say, 10 digits. But, say, for a teratogenic organism, there are, say, only 5 digits. There's just one hand, the other hand is not there. Or, say, now there are three hands, something like that. Or, say, the eyes are not properly structured. Anything like that are teratogenic impacts. Developmental impacts are when the offspring is born, but during its developmental years, like for, say, humans, during its first 10 to 15 years, the development is not normal. So these are some developmental impacts. Maybe its brain did not get developed as it should have been. Maybe its heart or some other organs, they are not properly developed. So these are developmental impacts. Then reduced fecundity would mean that the organisms are not able to produce the same number of offsprings that they could have if they did not consume or they did not come in contact with these pesticides. And these pesticides serve as an additional stress to the organisms because they now have to deal with these toxins and not just the normal stresses that they had, like temperature stress or rainfall or predation pressure, all these things. Now they have an additional thing that they have to deal with in their life. So, moving on to biological control. So, what is biological control of pests? Like, what comes under the category of biological control of pests? And what are the various ways in which you can biologically control pests?
Is it like hand picking method? So
Hand picking method, I don't think comes under biological control. I think that would still come in something like cultural method. You're saying hand picking the pests, right? Or weeding, things like that.
yes, yes, ma'am.
I don't I don't think that will come in biological control. Biological control mostly concerns when you have like when you employ living organisms or certain things from the living organisms, chemicals or something like that from organisms, and you employ them to get rid of the pest. I'm not really sure if weeding comes under that, but I will let you know. So, biological control is when you are trying to, when you are resorting to various biological practices in order to get rid of these agricultural pests. And they work at multiple levels. They work at the level of predators, parasites, or at the level of the host plant themselves. So, for predator and parasites, what you do is you try to um, recognize what are the predators and what are the parasites for your concerned pests, and then you introduce them into your field. So, you introduce them artificially or you increase their numbers, you add them, and then they might get rid of your or they might control the number of pests in your agricultural field. One example of this would be so in this image, what you're seeing here is, or I don't know if you can read it or not, what is written here is parasitic wasp larvae have eaten their fill inside this hornworm caterpillar. They chewed their way out and spinned white silk cocoons and pupate, and the caterpillar will soon die. So, what you see here is a green colored hornworm caterpillar, and on top of it are a lot of these white colored pupae, which are of a parasitic wasp that parasitizes these caterpillars. And what the wasp does is it punctures the skin of the caterpillar and it lays its eggs inside it. And the larvae then eat the caterpillar from the inside, and when they have eaten and when they're ready to be in the cocoon and pupate, that is when they punch a hole through the caterpillar skin again and they come out and they make their cocoon and they stay in that till the time they pupate. And this larva is then obviously, this caterpillar itself is then obviously going to die. So, and a parasite of a parasite is called a parasitoid. So, this wasp, which has laid its eggs here, or the larvae, these would be called a parasitoid wasp because this caterpillar itself is a parasite on the plant. Okay. And another example of introducing parasites or predators is this ladybug here, which is feeding on these eggs of the pests. And what is written here is that this ladybug helps to fight insect pests while they are still eggs or larvae. So yeah, it's feeding on the eggs and larvae of these pests, and it will help you try to get rid of these in your field. So if you are sure that the ladybug is not going to impact your crops, it does not feed on your crops, then it is a good option to introduce these organisms into your field, and this would be a nice way of getting rid of the pests and not impacting your own crops. Another method is to genetically modify your crops to convert them into genetically modified organisms in such a way that they are resistant to pests. And a famous example that you all might have heard in high school also is that of BT cotton. BT cotton has is able to produce this toxin, which when insects feed on this, when larvae feed on the leaves of this cotton, they themselves die. So this cotton is resistant to the action of pests. And the last one is block the reproduction of pests by setting up pheromone traps. So you try and recognize what is the pheromone of your certain pest species, of your concerned pest species. And those pheromones you recognize, you identify, you then extract them, you purify them, and then you can set up these pheromone traps, and the males and females will get attracted, and they would approach these traps in a hope of finding mates, and they might get trapped here and they will not be able to then get out or harm your crops. Is that okay? So 1 minute. Yeah, so is this okay? Should we move on?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay, so I would like to talk about a case study, about some few case studies of successful biological controls that were carried out in our country. So this is sugarcane pyrilla. The scientific name is Pyrilla purpusilla. So here you can see these white things. These are the insects that parasitize sugarcane crop. So these are our pests. So there was a severe outbreak of this sugarcane pyrilla in 72 and 73 in the states of Punjab, Haryana, UP, and Bihar. And you might be aware as these are the states that are very, they produce sugarcane in very high numbers. So these states, they faced this severe outbreak, but they were able to successfully control this pest by the utilization of these biocontrol agents. One is the egg parasitoid. Basically, it parasitizes the egg of sugarcane pyrilla, and its name is uh, Tetrasticus pyrale, and the other is the nymphal predator. So when the egg has hatched, when the nymphs are out, then there is this predator which is called Epipyrops melanoleuca. It feeds on these nymphs of sugarcane pyrilla. So these are two different bioagents that were used to control the spread of sugarcane pyrilla, and this saved the government around 11 crores of rupees, in which would otherwise have been spent either in pesticides or in the loss of these sugarcanes. It would have it would have caused a loss of 11 crores of sugarcanes or something like that. And so this saved us a lot of money. And then again, after a few years, after around 15 years, in 1987, there was again an outbreak of this pest, which happened in these states, in the sugarcane growing states. And at that time, we were saved around 16 crores. And in 94, there was a severe incidence of this pest in Karnataka. And again, these potential biocontrol agents allowed us to protect our crops against this Pyrilla purpusilla. Moving on to the next one, which is called the American bollworm or the gram caterpillar. The scientific name is Helicoverpa armigera. It is also known as the cotton bollworm because one of the crops that it very famously parasitizes is the cotton, or it's also called the corn earworm, the old world bollworm, or the scarce bordered straw. It parasitizes many crops out there, but one of the major one is cotton, and we successfully managed it by the use of nuclear polyhydrosis virus. So this is a virus that infests these bollworms, and it kills them. So we used this virus and we got rid of this pest from cotton, pulses, vegetables, oil seeds, all these crops in India. And last but not the least is the San Jose scale, which is also called as the Quadras right, perniciosis. In India, it was introduced from France in 1906, and how it was managed was that this is an excerpt from a paper. It says that for the suppression of this pest on apples, they released two exotic parasitoids. Exotic, why? Because since this pest itself is introduced from France, they would have brought the parasitoids also from some other country. That is why these are exotic parasitoids. One of them is called Tower, and the other one is Walker. And all of them, they were released, and then they helped us control the San Jose scale, and it showed promising results. So this is how this damaged apples look like when they are infested with this is the particular insect. Okay, so moving on to what is integrated pest management.
Ma'am,
Yeah,
what if those predators that we introduce to control the pest, if they get, out of hand, like if
yeah,
they're in.
that is a uh, very prominent risk that we are taking while introducing these predators into a new native place. So what we should keep in mind while doing that is maybe have a controlled experiment in which you don't release these predators like out in the wild, but you have some controlled experiments, and then you see that if in this controlled area it's spreading out of control, or are those predators limited, and when the pests die off, they also die off because their prey is gone. If that is the case, then you should make it like then you should release those on a wider scale. But if that is not the case, if they are becoming pests themselves, then I think you should look for alternatives and find some other predators to control the pests. Is that okay?
Oh, okay, ma'am.
Yeah, that is a very valid doubt, and that is something that a lot of the times the governments used to miss out, and that is how. So there was this example of where in Hawaii they introduced the Indian mongoose in order to control certain pests, but then Indian mongoose itself had become a pest in Hawaii. So that is why while introducing certain exotic species in order to control certain other species, you should keep in mind that they themselves do not become a pest in your native place. So moving on to integrated pest management. So can you guys tell me what is integrated pest management, or what does the term suggest?
It's like combinations of various methods.
Yeah, that is true. So integrated pest management, basically you use a combination of various methods to get rid of pests. And these methods might include application of certain pesticides, biological control, cultural control. So you do all these in certain so in a certain combination. Maybe you spray a little pesticides, and you also carry out biological control. You release the predators or parasites, and you also carry out you also clean your field yourself in order to control the amount of pests that you have in your agricultural fields or in your orchards. So moving on to the last lecture now. So what is ecotoxicology, or how would you like to define the term ecotoxicology? Anyone? Do you want to take a guess? What do we mean by ecotoxicology? Okay. Yeah, Janvi, were you saying something?
Is it the accumulation of toxicity in various factors or elements of ecology?
Yeah, yeah, correct. So, ecotoxicology is basically the study that looks at what is the impact of the contaminants, such as pesticides, or insecticides or weedicides or such things, or the toxins that you release in order to control certain species, what are their impacts on the ecosystem, what are their impacts on individuals, on the populations, on communities, and on the ecosystem as a whole. And the common toxic elements out there are things like plasticizers and pesticides and heavy metals, volatile compounds, mycotoxins, all these things. So, moving on to what is ecological restoration, or what do you mean by ecological restoration? Any guesses? This should be pretty obvious from the term itself, ecological restoration. Okay, so basically it means that you are renewing, restoring the degraded, damaged, and destroyed ecosystem. So that is what it is. If the ecosystem has been destroyed or damaged by anthropogenic activities, by human activities, and now you're trying to restore it or now you're trying to renew it, that is called ecological restoration. And restoration ecology is the scientific study that you carry out that would uh, let you know how you should practice ecological restoration. So it is the study of the same thing, and ecological restoration is the practice of restoring the ecosystem that have been disrupted by human interruption and actions. So there are certain principles that govern ecological remediation. So are you guys aware of what are these principles that one should keep in mind while trying to carry out ecological remediation? Or would you want to take a guess?
Ma'am, what is remediation?
Remediation is, so the it comes from the term remedy. Remedy is when you try to solve something, right? So when you're trying to remedy that damage that has been caused, so the ecosystem has been damaged, it has been destroyed, and you're trying to remedy that, you're trying to undo that, or you're trying to find a solution to that. That is what is called, like, that is what it means by ecological remediation. So you're trying to restore the ecosystem after it has been damaged. So what I'm asking is, what are certain principles that you should keep in mind while you are trying to restore the ecosystem, or while you're trying to, renew a damaged ecosystem? Any guesses? Okay. So certain things you should keep in mind are to have a long-term stability, to be informed by the past and the future, to have ecological integrity, and to benefit and engage society. So what we mean here by different terms is that ecological integrity means that, okay, fine, maybe you have this area and maybe there was this forest area which was rich in certain mineral resources, and that is why the humans decided that, okay, fine, we're going to carry out mining in this area. So you went with your bulldozers, we cut down all the trees, and then we dug a huge pit there, and then we extracted all the minerals that we wanted, and now what we're left with is a barren land with a pit, and with a lot of this the things that we extracted, the mud that we dug out, with a lot of heavy metals that might have gotten out of that area, and all these things. So when you're trying to remedy this area, what you would want to do is, you would want to, like, obviously you would want to fill that pit back. You will want to put some fresh soil or topsoil in that area, and then to fast track uh, the restoration of the ecosystem, you would want to plant some trees, right? So ecological integrity means that you should keep in mind what were the species already in that area, what are the native species in that area, and you should keep in mind to plant those there and maintain the integrity of that ecosystem. If you want to restore an evergreen forest, you should not now start planting, say, certain pine trees or oaks or things that are found in coniferous forests, right? You should now, here also, you should keep in mind what are the species found in this area, and you should plant those only. You should plant broadleaf trees, you should plant rainforest trees in these areas, right? So that is how you maintain the ecological integrity. If you plant something else, if you say you want to plant some decorative plant, or if you want to plant something that grows faster, that might lead to invasion of that species in this area, and that will hamper your entire attempt of restoring the ecosystem, right? Then being informed by the past and the future is that you should be informed what was there in the past, what was already there in that area, how was that how was that forest structured, how many, like, there were there shrubs, or were there just a top canopy, was there a mid canopy, were there vines and climbers, what were the type of animals there, how can you build corridors to connect this particular patch of destroyed forests to other forests so that other species can, say, immigrate into this area and repopulate this area, right? All these things you should keep in mind. And for the future, you should have this model in mind, that if you're doing this right now, how much time will it take for it to restore itself, and you should keep on monitoring it time and again, so that you are sure that something has not gone wrong. There is not something, like, what you wanted to happen is only happening, and some other species has not occupied this niche that was supposed to be occupied some other species, because you do not want invasion to be happening. And if you monitor it time and again, you would be able to point out invasion at its very initial steps, and you can take it out and, plant the native species again and get rid of the invasive ones. So these are some things that you should keep in mind. You should plan it in such a way that it is sustainable over a long period of time, and it does not get destroyed or by small fluctuations, because since you're starting with a small population, there might be founder effect, there might be inbreeding depression and things like that. So while planning all that, you should keep in mind that you are planting trees and you're introducing organisms which are genetically diverse, so that the biodiversity is maintained and there is nothing that hampers the genetic organization of the structure. And when you are restoring a particular ecosystem, you should always try and engage the local population there. There would be people living there. You should make the restoration look as if it is for their benefit, because it is going to be for their benefit. But if they understand that yes, this is going to benefit us, then that is how they will engage with you, and that is how they will think that, okay, fine, this is our forest, we need to protect it. And if they get involved with the government officials, and they are also planting the trees, they are also trying to, irrigate the area and all these things, then when they have put in effort to restore that area, they will also put in effort to protect the area. Okay, so these are all these things that one should keep in mind while trying to model a restorative program. So moving on to what is bioremediation. So we talked about ecological remediation, where you're trying to restore the ecosystem once it has been disturbed. So what do you think means by bioremediation? Like, it is, like, you can take a guess from how it meant by natural control versus biological control. So what do you think it means by bioremediation? Would you guys want to take a guess?
It is a process where we use microorganisms such as bacteria and fungi to reduce contaminations in soil and water.
Yes. So you are correct. So that is exactly what is bioremediation. So, like in biological control, you were trying to use some biological agents like predators or parasites or their compounds in order to, control the pests. In bioremediation, you are trying to employ all these living organisms, microbes, bacteria, or other living organisms, like certain plants that are able to say process and metabolize these contaminants. So you're trying to use all these living organisms in order to remove the contaminants, the pollutants, and the toxins that might have been added to soil, water, and other environments in the vicinity of this area that you're trying to restore. So here you can see that all of these wastes, they can be worked upon by fungi, by bacteria, by plants, and they will help you restore the ecosystem back to its normal, right? So if there is, say, in bioremediation, one of the examples is for sewage processing. If you have a lot of sewage, instead of using everything like by a machine, you can have this huge storage unit in which a lot of the waste is going to settle down on itself, and the rest of the water can be processed by making it go through certain tanks which have these fungi and bacteria which can act on this water, or you can make it go through a field in which the water is controlled. It does not escape that area, it does not leach out into the nearest rivers, and you can put it in this field which might have these certain plants that are able to act on these toxins that are present in the water. It's able to take them up from its roots and metabolize them and then turn them into something which is non-toxic. They either oxidize these or they either reduce these. They do a lot of these redox reactions, and they convert all these toxic elements into non-toxic normal things that might be found there. They break them down. So this is what is bioremediation, and this is one way in which you can mostly try and restore the ecosystems without using a lot of machinery or without causing some other problems. And moving on to India and ecosystem restoration. How has India been working on ecosystem restoration? So, the United Nations, it declared the decade 2021 to 2030 as the decade on ecosystem restoration. Okay? So, this is the decade in which all of the countries in the entire world should focus on restoring their lost and damaged ecosystems. And this in India has also been considered as post-COVID restoration program, because 2021 is the year that has happened after COVID was almost dealt with. So this is when this program was launched, and there are a lot of these programs that I've listed out. There is this national afforestation program happening in India, which is focusing on rehabilitation of degraded forests and carrying out afforestation around forests. So, a lot of these areas where cutting down, timber logging, all of this has happened. They are trying to rehabilitate these areas and afforest or plant them again. Then there is this program called National Action Plan on Climate Change. It is aimed at improving the tree cover so that it is a climate adaptation. There is not much changes that we face, because if we have the same tree cover, the trees might be able to mitigate the climate change that is going on, because they act as carbon sinks. They absorb a lot of carbon dioxide. They will bring down the amount of global warming. Then there is National Biodiversity Action Plan, which is trying to implement strategies that reduce the rate of degradation, fragmentation of natural forests, and they're trying to increase the biodiversity that is or restore the biodiversity that's found in our subcontinent. And then there are these two programs called the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme and the National Rural Livelihood Mission. These two, they recognize how natural resources are not just the government's property, but they are also very much linked to rural livelihoods. And a lot of people who live in these rural areas, they use these natural resources. Either they go out and collect forest products, which are like non-timber forest products, or they go out, they take their cattle for grazing in these areas. So a lot of the ways in which the rural people are dependent on the forests. So these are the two schemes that work on that aspect of restoration. So one of the programs that I will talk about, there are many other programs that are happening in India in which we are trying to restore our forests. But one of the famous ones is mangrove restoration, It is not just happening in Andhra Pradesh, it's also happening in the Sundarbans, in the West Bengal area, and all these areas. I was not able to put them together um, in the time that I had. So, but this is the Andhra Pradesh program in which they are trying to replant the mangrove trees. So, a total of 520 hectares of degraded mangrove forests has already been restored in the Krishna and the Godavari mangroves. So, there are a lot of institutes in which people are carrying out research, and they what they do is they either genetically modify the mangrove to make them resistant to changes, or they bring the mangroves from the Sundarbans and they try and like grow the saplings till they are of a certain age that you know that these will now not be impacted by any small change. Like they will not get uprooted by certain rise in water levels, or they will not be impacted by certain small fluctuations in temperature. So they grow the saplings to that much age, and then a lot of local people, with the help of a lot of local people, with the help of a lot of student programs, these mangrove saplings are then they go out and they have these dedicated areas that are selected for the restoration program, and they go out and they plant these saplings there where there is abundant water supply, there is salty marshy water, and they're trying to like plant these saplings again. So initially, the growth rate of the new seedlings is slow, but later, after 2 3 years, the growth rate has been improved, and the biodiversity of the area is also positively impacted by these restoration programs. The animals there, the crab population, as is written here, is restored in these areas. So a lot of these reptiles, or a lot of these animals that live in the mangroves, or these organisms that are specifically found in these ecosystems, they also, if you restore these mangroves in such a way that they're connected to other ecosystems, they also try and repopulate these areas. But another way, if you are restoring a landscape which is not connected to any of the related landscapes nearby, what you can do is you can carry out a dedicated program of, bringing those certain wildlife back into these areas, bringing the keystone species back into these areas by human programs, like we brought the cheetah into India. So there is no corridor there, but you reintroduce them by properly caging them and by reintroducing them into this particular landscape. So if you have, say, certain area that you're restoring, it is not connected to any other area, you can go, you can collect specimens from that area, or you can uh, carry out some ex situ conservation and then release those particular species into this area. So this is all I have for today. If you guys have any doubts, you can ask me. I'm here. You can ask me any doubt from the previous quizzes, from the previous weeks, or from this week's lecture, or from my lecture, anything. And if you don't have any doubts, you can leave the meeting. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ma'am, about the exam, do we get to, do we have to answer the long kind of questions? Do we get them in the exam?
Oh, I'm not really sure about that because, like, I don't know what is the exam pattern. Is it not informed in the announcement section or by the course people?
No, ma'am, not yet.
Not yet. As far as I am aware, because I took some other NPTEL courses, we mostly just had MCQs and not really certain long answer questions. But I'm not really sure. I guess you should put up a query, and the course people might be able to answer that a little better.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much.